Okay. We are streaming live to Facebook. Yay. So it is Sipping Tea with Sabrina, and we are going to be sharing the tea on how to stay virtually connected with your donors. But if you've never met me before, I am Sabrina Walker Hernandez. I am the founder of Supporting World Hope, a nonprofit consulting company. I started after 25 years in the industry. And we have with us today, Jami Yazdani, of Yazdani Consulting and Facilitation. So before we get started, click the like or the heart button if you can hear me loud and clear, and let me know where you're watching from, even if you're watching in rebroadcast, because this is going to help us with our algorithms, with our Facebook algorithms. So Jami, tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, first of all. And I wanted to say that I have the mug you sent, and so I'm happy to be, well, I'm sipping coffee, but I'm sipping with Sabrina. So I started Yazdani Consulting and Facilitation in 2018 after spending more than 15 years in libraries and higher education, and more than a decade of that time was spent in leadership roles. I've served on the boards of several nonprofits and professional associations, working in chair, vice chair, marketing, programming, and mentoring roles. So I bring a lot of hands-on experience with managing tight budgets, grant funding, soliciting donors, leading volunteers, and planning and hosting events to my work with nonprofit and association clients. Most of the work that I do at Yazdani Consulting is project consulting. So I'm a certified project management professional. I also do management consulting, management training, and coaching services.
Wow, you have a breadth of experience. So you have a lot to offer our guests today. I'm so excited because I interview and it's very knowledgeable people, and you are one of those. And what we're talking about today is how to stay connected with donors. And one of the things that I want to share before we get into the questions for you, because the questions are going to be around, the virtual piece of it, is I want to share with the audience is one of the most important things that you should be doing right now to stay connected with your donors is you really should be calling them and checking on them during this pandemic, because just like you and I, Jami and I was talking, we've been quarantined. We try to exercise, but sometimes we don't. We try to eat right, sometimes we don't. But one of the things that have really impacted me, because I have a compromised immune system, is I literally have been in the house since March, and I only go out, if I have a doctor's appointment or something like that. And you don't know how many of your donors are going through that or something similar with their family, or a family member got sick. So if you have not reached out to your donors during this time, I really suggest that you do, because that's going to set your nonprofit apart from other nonprofits. You're basically checking on them. You're building that relationship with them, and you are staying connected with them. So really check in on your donors. And then one of the strategies also that I suggest for staying connected with your donors is, I have done this with a client of mine, host Zoom meetings with them and let them know how COVID has impacted your organization, especially your top donors or your advisory board. If you have an advisory board that's consisted of your top donors, let them know how COVID has affected your organization. For this particular client, a couple of their staff, they had to go virtual with their programs, their after school programs. A couple of their staff had COVID. So, and then they had to pivot. We all have to pivot to virtual fundraising. And that's what Jami is going to be talking about. How do you pivot? And they actually got the input from their donors. Like, what would you like to see virtually? Would you like to see a gala? Would you like to take the golf tournament virtually? So get input from your donors around that. I've had some organizations ask about how do you start relationships with new donors during this time, especially when it's not face-to-face. And I say that you can also start relationships with new donors by hosting like town halls or hosting house parties where you invite people in via Zoom to learn about your organization. Of course, with these events, you're not going to be asking for money unnecessarily because you're just starting to build a relationship, but you're going to be introducing people to your organization, and you can do that via Zoom. There's a process for that, and there's a script for that. If you want to learn about that, you can visit my website at www.supportingworldhope.com. And I have a pretty laid out script, sample emails to invite people, an agenda, all of that. And so it is pretty easy to do, especially if you have a roadmap to follow. And so the other thing is, how do you engage your board in fundraising during this time? Again, I would say that depending on what you decide to, first of all, you and your board need to decide what you're going to be doing, like virtually, and how you're going to fundraise. And Jami's going to come in and talk about those different options, and we're going to answer some questions around that. So let your board know all the different options that are out there as far as virtual fundraising, and then have that discussion and see what they want to do as far as fundraising. But I will say that even if you're doing a virtual event, it does not change getting the planning piece. It doesn't change getting your sponsors in advance. It doesn't change any of that. You still, just like if it's a live event, you still get your sponsors in advance. Everything up to that virtual piece remains the same. And so now we're going to get into the virtual piece. But if you're just joining us, I want to say welcome to the broadcast. And we're currently talking about how to stay virtually connected with your donors. And we just covered, how more of the relationship building, making sure you check in on your donors, make sure that you are using Zoom and other platforms to stay connected with your donors and your board. And also you can use those platforms as well to build new donor relationships. And so it's not, you just don't stop building relationships, because relationships is the key to fundraising. You continue building those relationships. You check on your existing donors. You can continue to build new donor relationships. So again, let us know where you're watching from, and click the heart or the like button if you can hear me loud and clear. And I say this because it's going to help with our Facebook algorithms. And even if you're watching in rebroadcast, let us know where you're coming from. So Jami, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, I got 4 questions for you, and I'm excited to learn about it too, because I always call virtual the wild, wild west of virtual. So everybody's doing, it just came, I wouldn't say it just came about, but I'm sure other innovative people were using virtual platforms. But really, since March, most nonprofits have really kind of been delving into it. So let's talk about it. Are there any platforms you recommend for hosting online events?
So like you said, it is the wild, wild west. And I think it feels that way because, in the past, I think folks often took their time when considering a platform, and it just feels like you don't have time. You've got to, you got to figure it out now and just try what's out there. There are so many platforms out there. I mean, I struggle to kind of keep up with everything that's new. But I think, so it's hard to make a recommendation because I think it really depends on the nature of the event. So what is your purpose? How many people are you planning on having attending? Are you going to be sharing any kind of content? What level of interaction do you want between the participants, the attendees? Generally Zoom and WebEx actually are pretty popular and pretty versatile for a variety of events. Zoom breakout rooms are really great if you want to sort of allow some networking. Zoom and WebEx both have webinar and training suites on top of, kind of their basic suites that have some additional features that you could use for events. But there are also a lot of platforms out there that mimic in-person interactions. So they sort of allow attendees to move between tables, to go to booths that vendors might have, and listen to speakers. Remo, R-E-M-O, is one that I've worked with personally, and really like and think is pretty reasonably priced and easy to get set up. And that's one that I would recommend to folks, particularly if you're looking for your participants to be able to do some networking that they manage. But I've also heard good things about Lunch Pool. There's a whole bunch of similar kind of platforms out there.
Okay, so Remo and Lunch Pool is the two that you've heard about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And Remo I've used.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's to set up like a conference style, or is that to?
Yeah. So Remo in particular, you kind of go into a space on the screen that looks like many of the like hotel rooms where you have a hotel ballroom kind of things where there's a stage and there's tables with 6 chairs around it, and there may be booths, or there may be a room that has, you know, vendors at booths, and you can sort of click and sit at a table and network with the folks at that table and go to another table or go to a vendor booth. And then of course, if you're having speakers, it looks more sort of like the screen that we have now, but there's several platforms out there that allow you, that sort of create a virtual environment. It's not virtual reality, but it creates a virtual environment that is very similar to what you find in a lot of particularly conference type events, or you know, kind of dinner events, that sort of thing.
Perfect. I hadn't actually never heard of those 2 platforms. So with so many platforms and technologies available, how should a nonprofit decide which technologies to use and where to focus their energy and resources?
Yeah, so because obviously there are a lot of factors to consider, but the 2 that I think that are most important for nonprofits are your budget and your bandwidth for change. And what I mean by bandwidth for change is, I think you really need to consider whether you are able as an organization to sort of learn, implement, and manage a new technology. So do you have staffing who can implement the platform and set it up for your event? Do you have someone who can produce the event? Do you have people who can offer tech support? Are your users tech savvy enough? Do they have the right devices and internet access to access these platforms? So generally, I recommend to folks that they, if possible, use what you already know and what your users are comfortable with. So if your nonprofit has had a lot of success, say with Facebook marketing, then try to do something like this on Facebook Live, or host some kind of interaction around Facebook. If you're pretty sure that your users are comfortable with Zoom, you know, maybe you try to do something in Zoom. But if you have some budget, if you have some staff that are tech savvy and could support a new technology, then give it a try. But some of these solutions offer, particularly the ones that mimic face-to-face interaction, do have like support. You know, you can get sort of support packages where they will do it for you. But I know that sometimes that's not going to be in the budget of a lot of nonprofits. I also think that folks sort of jump to platform too quickly. So, you know, it's like, oh, we normally have this event. What platform can we use? I think folks really need to take a step back and think about what the purpose of the event is and what you're actually trying to accomplish, and then make platform decisions, because it may not be necessary to try to sort of mimic your in-person event online to reach the same goal, right? And so you might not need to do everything that you do in a face-to-face event online to reach that same goal that you have. There may be some quicker, smaller, cheaper, easier ways to do it.
Okay. So what types of online events should nonprofit consider? You kind of went into this, and you know, share some of your ideas.
Yeah, so I do really love what you've put together around the house parties. I think that's really, really great. And I think that's a really good idea. I have seen particularly nonprofits that do sort of conference type speaker events. Most people have been able to sort of transition those online with relatively little difference to the agenda, although I would recommend breaking up sort of larger, what I would call passive events, where folks are just watching speakers or performances, into shorter, smaller events. There is a limit to people's attention spans and how long they're sort of, you know, something that was a day that may be too much. You know, you might want to split it into 3 days for a couple of hours. I have seen people turning sort of what were more active events like races or volunteer opportunities into kind of individual or small group activities that people can do at home, and have those participants sort of tag or share photos on social media. I've seen some nonprofits take kind of their galas or their annual dinner and make that into sort of a delivered catered meal or bottle of wine sent to an attendee or donor's home. And then, you know, you're sort of all enjoying it together while you watch a presentation or performance and are interacting online. But it really depends on what your goals are, you know, and who your audience is and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. I've been how do you say it, gala stalking, signing, because most people don't charge for their galas, so I've been signing up to go to their galas just to kind of see how you know, they're running and 5Ks and stuff like that. So I suggest that you do that too, so you can kind of get a best practice going in your head. So let me ask you, I have one more question here. So how are nonprofits pivoting to virtual fundraising in the face of COVID-19?
Yeah, so I mean, so many nonprofits and you know, you and I talk to other nonprofit consultants, and so we hear how the nonprofits have really relied on sort of a big annual event to do the majority of their fundraising, and that's just not going to be sustainable in our new environment. I think particularly because even if you still hold some of these events online, you may find that people aren't as willing to pay as much, say, for a virtual table or a virtual opportunity as they were for a face-to-face event. So it's a little different to pay $5,000 for a table with a band, and you know, you're dressed up and you're bringing your friends or colleagues, than it is to do something like that online. And so I do think nonprofits shouldn't be afraid to do direct asks for donations, right? You know, instead of relying on that $5,000 table, can you rely on, you know, 50 people giving, you know, however much money? So
I totally agree.
Yes,
Totally.
I mean, and I think a lot of nonprofits weren't comfortable with those kind of direct asks, but I think it's necessary. You know, and you can do fundraising challenges, sort of tied maybe to specific priorities. I've seen nonprofits sell T-shirts and other branded items, or they host virtual auctions. So that's something that can be done pretty easily online. You know, some of the nonprofits I've worked with have just started adding a donation button to other interactions. So now there's a donation button at the bottom of your monthly newsletter, where maybe that wasn't sort of how you interacted with your users before. The donation button is more prominent on the website. I've also seen nonprofits partner with other nonprofits. So I think you should consider some partnerships, or even with businesses where you can sort of promote each other's goals and sort of request donations or purchases together. But, you know, as you pointed out, I think particularly for small nonprofits, you know, we've been going through this for a couple of months. The bigger, well-funded, well-staffed nonprofits have already pivoted, and they've found some ways to do things. And so, you know, see what they're doing, and you may not be able to do it at the same level, but there are probably some pieces of what they're doing that you could implement. But I think folks shouldn't be afraid to do a direct ask, or even say, you know, we usually hold this conference every year and that gives us our operating budget, or we hold this gala. We're not able to do that this year, so we really need you to step up and try to help us.
Yeah, and I think that's key to, you know, staying connected with the donors and using platforms like Zoom to bring them in and say, hey, this is how COVID has impacted us. We can't hold our conference. We can't do this. And we ask the donors to step up. But if you keep them in the loop and explain to them, maybe, you know, that face-to-face ask, I always say, man, you know, with my organization, we limited it to 2 special events a year, because there's a lot of staff hours, a lot of time that goes into those. I would much rather spend my time making a face-to-face ask. like you suggested, than to put all this energy and effort into an event. But some nonprofits are not quite there yet. So when you mentioned online auction, I do want to say that in the past, I have used One Cause, which was formerly BidPal, which is a good way to do an online auction. And so look into that. And Mobile Calls is another one. So let me check and see if we have any questions out there. And let me check on, sorry, I apologize for that. But one of the most common questions that I get is, Sabrina, can you help me with fundraising for my nonprofit? And I always say the answer is yes. So one of the next steps for you is to visit my website. Again, my website is www.supportingworldhope.com to check out my services. Actually, and Jami, I also want you to let people know what your contact is for the services that you provide. So if you can share that with us, that would be great.
Yeah, so the website is yazdaniconsulting.com. So that's YAZDANI consulting. And we're all over social media and all of the places. And so, you know, there's plenty of ways to contact us. And I'm always happy to just sort of have a conversation with folks about what they're thinking, particularly in terms of platforms and whether they really have the capacity to, you know, kind of implement something new. So I'm happy to do that.
Perfect. And I am seeing maybe, let me see if I have a question here. I don't see the question, but if you're watching in rebroadcast, one of the things that I want to say is, if you have a question, you can put it, your question there, and we will get back with you on that. That is one of the things that we've always done, is follow up. Jami, as the guest today, will be able to answer your question as well as I can answer a question. So we really encourage you, if you're watching in rebroadcast, to please post your question, because most people do watch this in rebroadcast. Jami, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been very, very informative to me. The way your brain works is a whole lot different from mine. I'm more of a, we have this idea, let's execute it. And I see that you're more of a, you know, let's think about this, let's take a step back, let's see what our real goals are. And so that's a great balance. That's a great balance of personalities. And I just, what I said, and I've said this too, you know, I retired in 2019. So I said this to the person that actually took over for me as a CEO. I would not want to be a leader in this time. It is, you know, a scary scenario. And you really do have to think outside the box, and you have to change pretty quickly. And that's what I would say to those nonprofit leaders that are listening in on this, is you do need to pivot and you need to change pretty quickly. I know that some nonprofits have, like, I don't want to step into that virtual world. And this is what I would say to them. I would say, if you do nothing, you get nothing. And so you have to figure out what you're going to do, because your mission deserves to be funded. And so you have to figure that piece out. So please really step outside your comfort zone. Jami has made herself available to answer any questions that you have. So have I. We can walk you through that, you know, that fear, but the fear cannot stop you from moving forward. And if you are, if anything, this is what I've done. Go on Eventbrite, type in virtual, and all the virtual events will come up that nonprofits are doing. Most of them are free. Go and look at and attend a couple of them, so you'll have a roadmap to follow. If you don't do anything else, you know, kind of do that. And so that way you can look at it and you can say, okay, that's not so bad. I could do that. And then get with someone like Jami, who is real methodical in her approach, and walk it through, which platform should I use? And she'll talk about your target audience, and she'll talk you through that piece, so that, you know, that you can feel more comfortable. But you do have to pivot, and you do, because we don't know when this pandemic is going to be over. Unfortunately, we just don't know.
Right, and I think it's going to change the landscape going forward. And I do think, yeah, I do have an approach where often and some of this is about the kind of consulting work I do, but where I do kind of ask people to step back and think a little bit about the purpose. But by asking you to step back and reflect for a minute does not mean that we are not moving forward. We're just sort of making sure that step, and you are going to take that step and you need to take that step, but that we're putting the step kind of in the right place.
Right.
And because I think there's a lot of pressure sometimes to just make a quick decision. I do think, though, I was thinking this when you were talking earlier about reaching out to donors. There are people who have probably been interested in your organization and want to support it who have not been able to attend your face-to-face events for whatever reason. And so, I think there's an opportunity to reach out to those folks. And this is a great opportunity to do that. So it's not just the people who have been able to attend your events in the past who are folks who might want to support you. There are other people who might really, believe in the mission of your nonprofit, but for whatever reason, don't want to go to a gala, aren't available on the Tuesday night that you typically have your dinner meetings, whatever. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here, and I get the fear, but so many people are trying things right now that I think people are a little. I've been on many virtual events where things go wrong, where the technology fails for a minute, where the Facebook Live keeps dropping. And I think most people, particularly when they know folks are trying and this is something new, are willing to kind of roll with that, and they understand it. And so this is actually a great time to experiment, because if it fails, you can just say, well, the technology failed and blame it on Zoom or Facebook. Exactly. Or you could just, if it doesn't work, then when COVID's over, you can say, well, that was what we were doing during COVID. Now we're moving on to something else. So this is really a great time to try and experiment. Don't be afraid to do that.
I 100% agree. And I would tell you, coming from the background of attending a lot of in-person events, actually going to virtual events is a relief, because I don't have to leave my house and I can still support the nonprofit, but I am at home. I'm not having to go out after work and network and interact. And I actually prefer this. I'm hoping it'll be around for a little while, even beyond the pandemic, because I actually like it. But I want to close out. It's been very informative for me. And I thank you, Jami, for your time. I know you're very busy. I think you have something else going on today, another event. Do you want to tell people about that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm actually a nonprofit that I'm involved with in Vermont, the Vermont Women in Higher Ed. Normally would have been having a big conference, but they've split it into small. Each speaker that was going to present at the conference is now every couple of weeks they're doing a new session. And so I'm doing one this afternoon, which folks can register at vuedwhe.org. But yeah, it's been great. And I'm so excited, Sabrina, that you were willing to invite me on, and I got my mug. And, I think you have so much experience working with nonprofits. And I think this is a really great, way to sort of chat with people. And this is an example of us. You pivoted virtually. You normally did these in person. And, you're in Texas, I'm in North Carolina, and here we are. And I think it's been successful. I guess we'll find out later if it was.
Yeah, we'll find out later, right? And rebroadcast and see. But no, I think it has been too. It really has opened up the door. I actually would have never thought of this prior to the pandemic. I always got local people, and I lugged my camera and lugged everything over to their place and set up and do all this. So I don't think I'm ever going to go back again. I think this is going to be it right here. So speaking of that, if there's any topics you want to hear about, you can hit me up on my Facebook at Supporting World Hope to let me know, because I want to support the nonprofit world. So if there's a topic you want me to bring to you, just let me know. Also tap the live button, so the next time I go live, you'll be notified. And you can also see other live videos I have done by visiting my website. Again, it's www.supportingworldhope.com. We place all our videos there under the YouTube tab. And that's Sipping Tea with Sabrina. So I hope to see you next time. And that is it.